Everyone, my name is Tobi Otolorin, and I am a program manager on the Azure Network Security Customer Experience and Engineering team here at Microsoft. Today, David and I will be covering Azure Firewall Manager's integration with Azure WAF policies and DDoS protection plans. This is one of the webinars that we've been doing lately to improve community awareness of our product. Basically, what do our products do? What are the things that customers are familiar with, and what are the things they might not be familiar with, and features that are existing that they can use to improve their familiarity with our Azure products. So this is a series of webinars that we're trying to do to improve knowledge about our products again. And if you are new to the community, like Jason mentioned, I would advise that you try to join our community. We had one earlier last week where we went into details on how to make sure that your firewall is up to date and the methods by which you can go around and do your migration, and we went through like the three different types you can use. We mentioned the different advantage, pros and cons of these steps, basically which one is convenient for you to do, how to plan a migration. We went all over that in that particular webinar. So feel free to join our community. As Jason mentioned, there'll be information in the chat window on how to do that. So today, we're going to be going over Azure Firewall Manager and basically how it integrates, and you can use it with your Azure WAF and DDoS. Right. So today, we wanted to shine more light on how Azure Firewall Manager works for those who may not be familiar, and for those who are already familiar, basically, to make sure that you know some of the features that are now available in Azure Firewall Manager and how best to use them in your own environment. It could be from a compliance perspective, or when you're looking for recommendations, or you need a quick audit tool to see what's going on in your environment and what are the new features, what are the new capabilities of Azure Firewall Manager. I must mention again that, okay, this is not a sales pitch. Azure Firewall Manager is a free resource, by the way. So this is not a product where you are expecting some cost at the end of the month. It's a free resource that helps you gain insight into what's going on in your security depth, basically. If we have the firewalls and we have all these policies and we have DDoS protection, we have WAF policies, we have all of these security tools from layer 4 to layer 7. And you need a quick insight into what's deployed where, what needs to be migrated, what needs to be updated. This is a good resource for that. Basically, it gives you that central management in your environment. So we came up with this tool because we had a lot of customers asking for, hey, how do I manage this? Or in this third-party product, they have that. So it became a whole lot of, I have about 200 policies. How do I manage them? I need to clone a particular policy. How do I manage that? I need to create a hierarchical procedural management. Basically, I need a parent and then children firewalls where the children will inherit certain attributes from the parent. So we'll cover some of those things today. Please bear with us. David will be going over some of these. We actually have a live demo session where it will go over some of this information with you. And some of the benefits of using this feature in Azure Portal are some of the things that we're going to focus on today. We'll also take a look at how to manage and check what your security stance is. Basically, how do you manage across regions in terms of, if I have a policy here and I want to use it in another region, how can I work with that? So we'll touch on each and every one of this as we go on. So just bear with us. So we'll look at this from the policy management, the WAF management, DDoS protection plan, and also the basic reasons why we created this central management tool. Okay, let's start with Azure Firewall Manager, as a whole. Azure Firewall Manager was created initially at the beginning for basically to manage two of your Azure Firewall deployment instances, which is when you're deploying your Azure Firewall at the start, you were either deploying it in a hub VNet scenario, which is the hub virtual network that works independently with your spoke networks, or with the secured VNet, which is when you have your Azure Firewall in a V1 scenario. Where you have a V1 scenario, what's happening is you can easily route traffic to your hub firewall for filtering and logging without the need to create UDRs on your spoke virtual networks, because it's managed automatically for you. So you don't have to do any manual setup of UDRs. It's just straight. You have a V1 and you put a firewall in there. All the spokes in that V1, they know the way to the firewall. It runs with BGP, and it just integrates so well for people who have a lot of deployment for branch to office kind of setting to do. The Hub VNet, on the other hand, is an independent way of using Azure Firewall. And you have your Azure Firewall, and you have some spokes VNet, and they all connect to that firewall for whatever access control you want to do. So we created that for Azure Firewall Manager. And then as time went on, we saw need to do more with Azure Firewall Manager. Basically, for other forms of firewall that we needed to do from layer 5 to 7. So application delivery came in, which is how we now use Azure Front Door and application gateway with your WAF. How do you get visibility into that? There were so many requests from customers on how can I get a plain view of all my WAF with my firewall policy? I just want a plain view. I don't want to go somewhere and then write a query to see all my app WAF policies. I don't want to go somewhere to see which VNets are protected. So as you begin to use Azure Firewall Manager, you actually begin to see certain things like there was actually a script that we actually had to come up with a script to let customers see which VNets were protected, and all of that. So some of these things that scripts are even existing for are now available in Azure Firewall Manager. If you stay long enough on this call, you would see David is going to spend some time on how to see what's protected, what's not protected, both from a DDoS perspective to application delivery perspective. With one click, you can see all your WAF policies, whether it be on App Gateway or Front Door. And this is where your auditing starts. This is where you begin to actually see what needs to be improved upon from a security posture perspective in your environment. So with central IT teams having to manage a lot of multiple firewall across region and subscription, it eventually becomes a challenge to see how you're using your firewalls. How do you know which policy is even redundant? How do you know which one is meeting the baseline policy and which one needs to be more developed for a local setting? So as time goes on that way, you just eventually begin to need Azure Firewall Manager. So we thought, okay, this webinar is going to show you how to use most of the features in Azure Firewall as you continue to go in your deployments. Right. Azure Firewall Manager may be used as an integration platform for other external partners. And right now, we currently have in general availability, we have Checkpoint, Zscaler, and we have iBoss. You can use Azure Firewall Manager to centrally manage all the policies that need to go to the internet from your branches by integrating with each of these partners. And when you use this security as a partner provider, you can provide additional layer of network protection for your VNet and branch internet connections. So that means there is a form of the Azure Firewall is doing its own job to permit only legitimate traffic. And then the iBoss, the Zscaler, the Checkpoint, they will do an extra layer of where is it supposed to go? What protection do I need to apply to this? So there's some form of an extra layer that comes with that. And for customers, for different reasons, when they need to do branch connectivity, they want to know, how do I configure this? What's available? And if it's not available in this device, is it available in that device? So basically, it's a complementary feature that you can use to actually improve the security posture in both scenarios. So with that said, we're going to have this. We already have all of this information available. We'll provide some documentation on that as we go into this presentation. But from here, David is going to take it and it will go more into how Azure Firewall Manager will be used in some of these scenarios that I've mentioned, basically to get more insight into your DDoS protection and protect against volumetric attacks. It's going to provide more insight into how app deliveries with app delivery platforms like App Gateway and Front Door and the firewall policies, how you can use the Firewall Manager to manage them, and also how you can use your Firewall Manager to see what's going on in your environment for firewalls and policies as well. So Azure Firewall Manager is going to give you all of those insights, and David is going to go through all of that in the next couple of minutes. So I'm going to be handing over here to David to show us more on how Firewall Manager integrates very well in your Azure environment.
All right, thanks, Toby. You just let me know, Toby, if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen.
All right, perfect. Yeah, so hey everyone, I'm David Frazee, program manager here on customer experience and engineering team. And so I'll be taking over from here. I'll start talking about Azure Firewall Policy Management, what firewall policies are, and how to use Firewall Manager to really manage this. So let's take a look at what Azure Firewall Policy is. It's a global resource that can be used across multiple Azure Firewall instances in secured virtual hubs and hub virtual networks. And the policies will work across regions and subscriptions. So if you have policies that are deployed to, let's say, East US, this can still be associated to really any firewall globally, Central US, in APAC regions, EMEA regions, doesn't matter. Firewall policy is the recommended method to configure your Azure firewall over the previously used classic rules. There are a good number of benefits from migrating from classic to firewall policy, such as being able to use IDPS, enabling TLS inspection to inspect encrypted traffic for possible security risks, using URL filtering to extend the firewall's capability to consider an entire URL rather than just the FQDN, and to use web categories to allow administrators to quickly allow or deny large categories of web traffic like social media websites, news websites, gambling sites, and more. The other major benefit from moving over is the overall central management experience you will get from Firewall Manager over a standalone firewall configuration experience where you'll have to go to each and every firewall to manage all the rules and all the settings there. Migration from classic rules to firewall policies is fairly seamless with minimal downtime. If you were to, let's say, run a consistent PS ping on the side while you do this migration, you might see 1 or 2 PS ping losses, and then that's about it. By that time, the firewall policy has already taken over and we're fully migrated. A policy can be created and managed in multiple ways, including Azure Portal, REST APIs, ARM templates, Azure PowerShell, and CLI. And so one of the major key benefits of using Azure Firewall Policy is to be able to use this hierarchy of policies. Inheritance of parent policies allows DevOps to create local firewall policies on top of organization mandated base policies. So policies created with parent policies will inherit all the rule collections from that parent policy. Network rule collections inherited from a parent policy are always prioritized above network rule collections defined in the new or a local policy. And then the same logic will also apply to application rules. However, it's really important to note that network rule collections are always processed before application rule collections, regardless of the inheritance. Threat intelligence mode is also inherited from the parent policy. You can set your threat intelligence mode to a different value to override this behavior, but you can't turn it off. It's only possible to override with a stricter value. So for example, if your parent policy is set to alert only for threat intelligence, you can configure your local policy to alert and deny. The threat intelligence allow list is inherited from the parent policy as well. The child policy can add additional IP addresses to the allow list, but it cannot override values from the parent. NAT rule collections aren't inherited because they have to have a specific public IP given to a particular firewall. So with inheritance, though, any changes to the parent policy are automatically applied down to the associated firewall child policies. And so here's a quick screenshot of what it looks like, kind of using Firewall Manager, some policies, whether you want to create a new policy, if you want to associate to hubs or VNets. But we'll go a little bit deeper into this when I pull up the portal and go through a bit of a demo here. So now let's talk about Azure WAF Management and what Azure WAF policies are. So web applications are being increasingly targeted by malicious attacks that exploit commonly known vulnerabilities such as SQL injection, cross-site scripting, PHP injections, and more. Web application firewalls or WAFs are a way to provide a centralized protection of your web applications for that OWASP top 10. Azure WAF can be deployed for Azure Application Gateway, where our newest version is using Core Rule Set 3.2 that comes with a new WAF engine that is a high performance, Microsoft proprietary engine that has significantly improved performance in WAF latency. 8 times more requests per second using the same compute power as the previous versions, and then 16 times larger request sizes with better protection and with efficient regex processing and a richer feature set. You can also deploy WAF with Azure Front Door that uses the default rule set 2.0 as the latest version. This version of WAF is a combination of the OWASP rule sets as well as Microsoft Threat Intelligence collection rules, which is written in partnership with the Microsoft Intelligence team to provide increased coverage, patches for specific vulnerabilities, and better false positive reduction. So WAF policies contain all the WAF settings and configurations, including exclusions, custom rules, managed rules, and more, like bot protection and rule-specific exclusions. These policies are then associated to an application gateway globally, an application gateway listener, which is a per site, or a path-based rule, which is a per URI type policy. For Azure Front Door, these WAF policies are associated to the front-end domains of the front door service. But let's go a bit deeper into the app gateway configurations, and so we can talk about this example. So when you associate a WAF policy globally, every site behind your application gateway WAF is protected with the same managed rules, custom rules, exclusions, and any other configured settings. If you want a single policy to apply to all sites, you can associate the policy with the application gateway as a whole. With per site WAF policies, you can protect multiple sites with different security needs behind a single WAF by using per site policies. For example, if you have 5 sites behind your WAF, you can have 5 separate WAF policies, one for each listener, to customize the exclusions, custom rules, managed rule sets, and all other WAF settings for each site. So say your application gateway has a global policy applied to it, then you apply a different policy to a listener on that application gateway. The listener's policy now takes effect for just that listener, and the application gateway's global policy still applies to all other listeners and path-based rules that don't have a specific policy assigned to them. For even more customization down to the URI level, you can associate a WAF policy with a path-based rule. If there are certain pages within a single site that require different policies, you can make changes to the WAF policy that only affect a given URI. This might apply to a payment or sign-in page, or any other URI that needs an even more specific WAF policy than the other sites behind your WAF. As with per site WAF policies, more specific policies override less specific ones. So this means that per URI policy on a URL path map overrides any per site or global WAF policy above it. Now I'll just kind of go over a quick example here. So say you have 3 sites, site1.com, site2.com, and site3.com, all behind the same application gateway. You want a WAF that's applied to all 3 sites, but you need added security with site 3 because that is where your customers are going to visit, browse, and actually purchase your products. You can apply a global policy to the WAF with some basic settings, exclusions, or custom rules if necessary to stop some false positives from blocking traffic. In this case, there's no need to have global SQL injection rules running because site 1 and site 2 are static pages with no SQL backend. So you can disable those rules in the global policy. This global policy is suitable for site 1 and site 2, but you need to be more careful with site 3, where sign-in information and payments are handled. You can apply a per site policy to the site 3 listener and leave the SQL rules running there. Also, let's assume there's a cookie blocking some traffic, so you can create an exclusion for that specific cookie to stop the false positive on that per site policy. But the site3.com/payments URI is where you need to be extra careful. So you apply another policy on that URI and leave all rules enabled and also remove all exclusions. So in this example, you have a global policy that applies to 2 sites. You have a per site policy that applies to 1 site. And then you have a per URI policy that applies to 1 specific path-based rule. And so here we can see a quick screenshot how you can centrally associate and disassociate WAF policies. Is how you can get an overview of really what's deployed in your environment for both the application gateway and the Azure Front Door. And then from here, we can also see how we can centrally create, we can clone, and then associate these WAF policies from this specific blade to continue to secure your application delivery platforms. All right, let's talk about DDoS protection plan management as well. And let's talk about Azure DDoS protection as a whole real quick. So there are two tiers for it. The first one being DDoS infrastructure protection, which is given as part of the cloud platform service to all Azure customers, as well as protecting Microsoft's own services like Bing and LinkedIn, etc. The second one, DDoS protection standard, offers Azure customers DDoS protection tailored to their application needs, with many additional value-added features and capabilities. Now, DDoS infrastructure protection is about making sure that the cloud infrastructure is protected against DDoS attacks. So if an attack targets a specific workload and is massive enough to create collateral damage, DDoS infrastructure protection will kick in and mitigate it. So the question then might be, well, why would an organization opt for a DDoS protection standard? The main reason is that most DDoS attacks are running below the infrastructure protection threshold. Namely, they are not large enough to risk the cloud infrastructure as a whole, but they may be large enough to bring down your specific workloads. So Azure DDoS protection standard guarantees that your workloads are protected against any DDoS attack bandwidth. It doesn't have to be a huge flood to affect the availability of your application. So let's quickly go over some of the key value features that DDoS protection standard provides. So DDoS protection standard offers the cloud scale of DDoS protection for your workloads and virtual networks in Azure. It's integrated with Azure Global Network, which means we leverage the scale of all 62 Azure regions and more than 60 terabits per second of mitigation capacity to mitigate the largest attacks in history. It also ensures that we can mitigate many significant DDoS attacks at the same time to protect each and every workload in Azure. DDoS protection standard ensures that DDoS protection policy that we set to detect attacks is fine-tuned to the scale and traffic patterns of your workloads. So these detection triggers are set dynamically per protected resource and adapt to changing traffic baselines. For each protected resource that has a public IP, we set 3 detection triggers in the DDoS policy. One for TCP SYN packets, second for TCP packets, and the third for UDP packets. A detection trigger determines when we decide there's an active DDoS attack that we need to mitigate. We continuously monitor the posture of the workload and set the triggers accordingly. Each workload is unique and will have its own set of detection triggers. Now, if we see a DDoS attack crossing that detection threshold, we kick in the DDoS mitigation pipeline, and by doing that, you will get full visibility into the attack lifecycle by analyzing attack analytics, telemetry, and logs. We integrate the attack analytics and telemetry with Microsoft Defender for Cloud, as well as Azure Sentinel, if you use it as your SIEM service in Azure. So all the data is available for compliance, as well as for cross-correlation with events other than DDoS attacks to guarantee your workloads are fully protected. With DDoS protection standard, we also offer DDoS rapid response. In most cases, when there's a DDoS attack, we mitigate it automatically, and you don't need to reach out to us. However, we do realize that in some cases, you may want to reach out to our team, and this is where rapid response comes in. If you engage with DDoS rapid response within up to 15 minutes, our engineering team will work with you to customize your DDoS policies if needed and help with attack investigation, again, for the sole purpose of ensuring your application is always available. We also provide you with post-attack analysis so you can use it for compliance, auditing, or reporting. Oh, sorry about that. And then finally, we offer a 4.9 of service SLA, just that if your application is under attack, we guarantee that your application availability and performance won't be impacted. And last but not least, we offer cost protection. This is essential since it ensures that during a DDoS attack, if you incur any costs associated with scale out of your resources, you will get 100% credit for it. For example, if you configure your VMs to scale from 5 to 50 VMs, and during a DDoS attack, they auto-scale to 50 VMs, you don't have to worry about the costs associated with it. The same applies to costs associated with extra charges due to DDoS attacks if you deploy an Azure Firewall or Application Gateway. Both have the ability to dynamically scale due to CPU and bandwidth. An even more concrete example would be the cost of egress traffic generated from a resource as a result of a DDoS attack. So one example would be if your resources are taking part in amplification or reflection attacks or TCP-based carpet bombing attacks, resulting in your workloads creating excessive connections to destinations outside of Azure. This can result in a huge surge of egress traffic, which would give you higher costs. Cost protection guarantees you are covered for such scenarios, and you could think of it like an insurance policy against extra charges associated with DDoS attacks. And so here is a quick screenshot of what it looks like to just kind of see and manage your DDoS protection plans within Firewall Manager. And if you wanted to associate a specific plan to a virtual network, you can do that really easily within the virtual network blades in Firewall Manager. All right, so now I'll just quickly show you the Azure portal. And just give me 1 minute. I'll just take a sip of coffee here. All right, so here we are. This is the overview blade of the Firewall Manager, or pretty much our landing page. So the first thing that you'll see is that we can filter on specific subscriptions, either if you want to see one subscription, if you want to see multiple subscriptions, you can do that. And you'll be able to see a nice visual representation of what our security stance is within your environment. So let's just kind of go over these. So the first one is talking about virtual hub security coverage. And this is talking about our virtual WAN hubs or secured hubs, not necessarily the virtual networks yet. So as we can see here, I have 3 hubs total in my environment, with 2 being protected with Azure Firewall and a third-party security partner provider. And then I have 1 here that has no type of protection enabled. Over here, this is our second blade. This is for the virtual networks as a whole. Nothing with vWAN here, just the virtual networks. We can see I have 105 VNets in this subscription, with about 17 VNets being secured with an Azure Firewall, or the virtual network is peered to a virtual network that has an Azure Firewall enabled. The third blade here is showing our coverage for virtual networks that have DDoS protection enabled. And so we can see out of the 105, I have about 4 virtual networks right now with DDoS protection enabled. Next, we'll look at our application delivery platforms. So the first one you can see is an application gateway, and the other one is the Azure Front Door. Just to be mindful about this, Firewall Manager is really only looking at application gateway v2s, not necessarily v1s. But I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into the application gateway or application delivery platforms. So here we can see the application gateways. I have 10 app gateways total, with 6 using some type of WAF policy. And then for my Azure Front Door coverage, I have 8 front doors total, with 7 using some type of WAF policy and just 1 that's not protected. So it's a really fine way, really nice way to just quickly come in and say, hey, how many application gateways do I have? How many are being protected? How many front doors do I have? How many have WAF? And then all these other type of great things. So let's go to the virtual networks. Let me let these load up, and then I'll just filter on my name to make it a little bit easier. So I just wanted to show everyone what it kind of looks like, you know, with each stance, right? Whether you don't have a firewall deployed, whether you have a firewall deployed, or if you're just peered to a specific hub that has a firewall. And you can also see here there are 4 VNets, and based on the naming convention, these are spokes for virtual hubs or for our vWANs. I'll go a little bit deeper into that when we go to our next section, the virtual hubs. But for right now, let's focus on these bottom 3. So we can see here on this bottom one, this is VNet secured FWM demo. And this is the one where I have a specific Azure firewall that's deployed, and it's using this firewall policy. We can see that I have a DDoS protection plan enabled, and if I wanted to change that, I can come select this network, click on Manage Security, and manage DDoS security plans or DDoS protection plans. I can disable this if I want, or I can enable it, and I can just quickly change a plan. If I want to change and use a different firewall policy, I can do that. Since this SKU is premium, it will automatically show me all the premium policies that are available to me. You can see this one above, this spoke firewall FWM demo VNet. This is actually peered to this secured VNet right here. And so we can see that this is a secured resource because, you know, we want you to be able to, forward the traffic, using user-defined routes when it comes to the VNet architecture to force your traffic to the Azure firewall. And then for this one here, I have no firewall deployed, but I do want to show you if I want to deploy a firewall in here, I can just come to manage security and I'll deploy a firewall with firewall policy. I can choose either standard or premium. I'll just do premium for right now. Select my firewall policy. And so it says validation passed. So what's really happening here is Azure Resource Manager, or ARM, is really looking inside this particular virtual network. And what it wants to do is it wants to see, does that virtual network have enough address space available to carve out a /26 subnet to make the Azure Firewall subnet so that we can deploy the Azure Firewall within. If there wasn't enough address space that was carved out, we would see that the validation failed, and you would get some type of error that really defined that pretty clearly. It would say, hey, there's just not enough address space available in this virtual network. Please change that and then come back. If I were to use a different firewall policy, let's say there was a DNAT rule in there, you would see that the validation would fail as well, since DNAT rules are very specific to firewalls because it has to use the public IP. From this blade, if you want to create a brand new virtual network, so if this is the blade that you want to use to manage creation of new network architectures, you can do that here. You can come to the Azure Firewall portion, you can enable force tunneling, you can choose standard or premium, and then just really define how you want to create this Azure Firewall, and then just create a new virtual network from there. All right, and that's pretty much it for the virtual network portion. Let's go to virtual hubs. So as we saw from the getting started blade, we had 3 virtual hubs. And one was not secured. So this is what it looks like if you have an unsecured virtual hub. You'll have no firewall deployed, no security partner, or anything along those lines. Well, I made 2 secured hubs here with some third-party partners, just to kind of give you a quick demonstration of what that looks like. So we have our firewall policy here. We have our firewall names, and then we can see that this hub is secured by Zscaler, and this hub is secured by Checkpoint. In the security partner status, if I had completed the rest of the configurations on the Zscaler or the Checkpoint side, we would see that this says connected. So let's go into this real quick, because I want to show you something that Tobi was talking about was routing configurations and preferences using Firewall Manager when it comes to your vWAN hubs. Okay, so in this overview blade for the secured hub, you can see that, hey, I am using this Zscaler security partner. If I need help with trying to finish this out, I can just click on this and it'll take us through the Zscaler documentation here. And we can see that the Azure Firewall status is secured. So let's go to security providers. Here we have the ability to disassociate the policy or just change the policy. And if we want to remove the Zscaler partner, we can do that from this portion. But really, this is where I want to show you, this is where our route management comes in. So when we talk about, you need to use the Firewall Manager for configuring your routing for, security, this is the blade that we're talking about. So you can see here for the internet traffic, I have the ability to either inspect using the Azure Firewall or the Zscaler, since that is the partner that I've deployed in here. And then for private traffic, I have the ability to bypass the Azure Firewall. So if I'm saying that east-west traffic is fully trusted and that does not require any inspection, we can bypass the Azure Firewall using that. If you're using non-RFC 1918 address space for your private environments, as long as you associate that address space here, then it will be considered a private prefix, and then we will force that traffic to go through the Azure Firewall as well. And so you can see from down here, I have my 2 spokes for this. I can change, remove internet traffic security, not needed for here, secure the internet traffic if I change this to Azure Firewall. And then, we can see that this is secured by an Azure Firewall. I do want to show real quick here. Let me go to my vWAN. Let me go to hubs. Let us talk about this here. I just want you to see that if you were to go to your secured hub, the first thing that you should see up here is manage security provider and route settings for this secure virtual hub in Azure Firewall Manager. And that's exactly the blade that we were looking at. This is where exactly you would go to say, hey, force this traffic to go to the Azure Firewall, or I want to allow the east and west traffic to go to this other route. Let me show you what this looks like in at least the effective routes when you do enable this. This might just take a minute or two. All right, here we go. Now we'll just look at the default route table here. All right, great. So as you can see, our top three or our first three routes here are our RFC 1918 space. And we can see that the next hop type is Azure Firewall. And then when it comes to our quad zero route or our default route, anything that's going to the internet, we can see that the next hub type is the security partner provider, which in this specific hub would be Zscaler. If you want, so it's also important to mention here, right? So these third-party security partners, this is strictly to inspect internet-based traffic, right? So that's branch to internet, a branch that's connected to your vWAN using ExpressRoute or VPN, or it's an Azure VNet to the internet. If you want to inspect VNet to VNet, or branch to VNet, or VNet to branch, or branch to branch, that will have to be, I'm sorry, not branch to branch. That would have to be with the Azure Firewall itself. You can't do that with the third-party security partner. That is strictly for internet-based traffic. But yeah, so this is what I wanted to show you. This is what it looks like. These routes will be plumbed to the vWAN spoke networks. So any type of VMs that are in there, you don't have to configure any type of UDRs for that. These routes are already sent to the VMs. All right, let's go back. And then so also, if I wanted to manage some security, if I want to choose another firewall policy for this, I can do that. If I want to change the security partner provider and select IBOS or Checkpoint for this, I can do that as well. And if I want to create a brand new secured virtual hub, I have the option to do it from this blade as well. Let me just go here. And so since I have an existing virtual WAN in this resource group, I can now select an existing vWAN. And so I can deploy it to this vWAN. But if I want to make a new vWAN, I can do it as from here as well. And then really just do all the configurations. I can disable or enable the Azure Firewall. I can do the standard or premium. And I can enable or disable the third-party security partners. And then remember, be mindful that if you use a third-party security partner, you do have to create a VPN because you're going to create a VPN connection to this third-party provider here. But yeah, so that's how you do it for the virtual hubs. So let's go to application delivery platforms now. And I will just filter on my name to make things a little bit easier. So as you can see here, I have a Front Door Premium and I have two application gateways. I'm using Front Door Premium because it is our security optimized offering for Front Door. If you use Front Door Standard, really the WAF options that you have are just custom rules only. But if you use Front Door Premium, you get to use that default rule set 2.0 that uses, Microsoft Threat Intelligence. It has bot rules, and it has a really nice way to create exclusions based on per rule basis, if that's what you really need to do. What's really great about this blade as well is that you can see what detection or what policy mode that WAF is in, whether it is in detection or prevention. So if you need a quick look through to see like, hey, what is being fine-tuned right now, what needs to be in prevention mode, you can just come here and just do a quick overview of what that looks like and then go in there and change it. Let me start from here right now. I want to talk about this upgrade from a WAF configuration. And so really what I'm trying to demonstrate here is, I talked about earlier, if you're using V1 application gateways, Firewall Manager isn't really there for that, right? So what we're trying to see is V2 application gateways. Because with V2, that's where you can actually use WAF policies in the new core rule set 3.2. So it's really easy to migrate from V1 to V2. It's a simple PowerShell script that takes 5 to 7 minutes. So once that 5 to 7 minutes is done, you'll see that an application gateway is created from that. And you'll see that actually what happens is that V2 application gateway will be deployed with a WAF configuration rather than a WAF policy. But if you want to start using a WAF policy, it is a really easy click. You give it a name and then you hit upgrade. In about another 5 to 7 minutes, now you have your application gateway with WAF policies. And now you can do all the other things like the exclusions, custom rule sets, and all that other stuff. And let me show you this right here. So for this application gateway, this is really in line with the example that I was talking about in the one slide. So this top one is associated to the application gateway globally, right? I have the ability to take it to a different listener or route paths if I wanted to, but this one is really just going to be my global one. This one, as you can see by the naming convention, it is a per site. So it's not applied globally, and it's just going to really protect listener 2 and any route path that's under that. And our third one here, this is strictly for the route path payments and not login. So what does that mean? So that means that per site policy that I was just looking at will protect listener 2 and the login URI path, but not the payments URI path. Payments URI path will be strictly secured by this WAF policy here, the per URI one that you can see. And I can make changes to this. If I want to secure the login as well, I can do that and click save. If I want to manage security, so if I want to, let's say, just associate a WAF policy or add a new WAF policy, I can do this from this blade as well. So let's go to firewall policies. And so you can see here, quick and easy way, I have a parent policy and I have a child policy. And then what I wanted to show you too as well, we kind of talked about you can use these globally. This is a policy that is deployed in central US, so that's just really where it's housed. But I can use it in north central US, and I can use it across all different types of domains as well, right? You can see I'm using it for 2 virtual WAN hubs and 1 particular virtual network that's acting as a hub as well. You can see that these policy tiers are premium. And if I wanted to make some changes, I can associate these to hubs. I can associate this to more VNets. And if I want to remove the VNet association, you do get the option if you want to delete that Azure Firewall that's in that VNet as well, but you don't have to. And if you want to create a new Azure Firewall policy from this blade, and let's say you want to take a parent policy, then you can just grab one of these parent policies and you'll be able to go forward from that. Security partner providers blade. This is a really quick, there's not much that you can do here. This is really just a more of a visual representation of what security partners that you have using Firewall Manager. DDoS protection plans. So for this blade particularly, what we do here is we really just create our DDoS plans. Fairly simple too, right? Just give it a name, give it a region, and you're good to go. But if you want to see what protected resources there are, you just click on the plan, go to protected resources. You'll be able to see the VNets, what application gateways are protected. And it's a really great way really easy way to see exactly what your security stance is when it comes to DDoS protection. And then last but not least, we'll look at firewall policies. So really quick way as well, I can see the 3 policies that I've created for my application gateway. I can see the 1 policy that I've created for the front door WAF. And if I want to create a new WAF policy, I can do that. But if I want to clone a WAF policy, let's say this WAF policy has some baselines that I want to use, but I just need to fine tune it just a little bit more. I can just clone this WAF policy, give it a name, and then once it's created, I'll just go in and make some extra changes to that. If I want to come in and actually manage the WAF policies themselves, I'll just click on that icon or the name itself. I can go into policy settings at this point. I can go and check my manage rules. If I want to create exclusions or add exclusions here, I can do that for this set. If I want to create custom rules, I can do that. And I can also see the association of the application gateway. This is another portion, if you want to manage the associations from here, you can do that, or you can still just use Firewall Manager to do that association. And that is pretty much it for the demo from my side. Let's see what's going on.
Thanks,
Toby.
David.
Yeah, Toby, do we have any questions?
Great job. Yeah, there's been a lot of questions. Apparently, there's been a lot of questions about the DDoS management, WAF management, and as a whole, customers would like to know. They have a few questions on. I think we need to create a distinct. If we need to create distinct information about how Firewall Manager works, on what it can provide. For instance, I think some people would like to, some members of the audience would like to know if we can do WAF tuning directly from Firewall Manager, and also they would also like to know if you can do like child to parent policy in WAF, just the same way you are able to do that with Firewall in Firewall. So those two, I think, need to be addressed.
Okay. Yeah, so when it comes to fine-tuning your WAF policies, that's not necessarily something that you would do with the Firewall Manager itself. You would come to the WAF policy blade, and you'll have to come into the actual policy itself, the resource itself within the Azure portal. And then from here, you'll go to your manage rules and create your exclusions. And so your exclusions is where you're going to be doing that fine-tuning. Let's say you're in detection mode, you're about 2 weeks in, and you're seeing all of these requests come in that are, false positives. They're actually good to go, but we're still blocking it. This is where you would come in, you would see exactly what rule in the managed rule set was blocking, and then try to, by a per rule basis, do that. But no, so sorry, it's not here where you would be able to fine tune or tune that WAF policy here. And then what was the other question, Toby? It was about WAF policy child.
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. So really, maybe in a sense, if we come to application delivery platforms, from here, we can manage the associations to an application gateway, let's say. And if I wanted to associate to a specific listener or to a specific URI path, I had that ability to do that from here by managing the associations. But like, let's say from the firewall policies, no, so, they don't really work as a parent-child when it comes to WAF policies, so it's more of a per site globally or a per URI.
Yeah, just to add to that, they are quite unique, independent security features on their own. So each one is able to work on the scope to which you're applying it, per URI or per site, which would be your per HTTP. And in that case, there's still precedence. So which is like the reverse order, because in your regular firewall hierarchy, the parent takes priority first, and then the child policies, which have like unique configurations, are then applied at the local level. In this case, it's a bit of a reverse, because this is a reverse proxy platform as well. So in your WAF, your per URI would take precedence over your per site listener, and your per site would take precedence over your global WAF configuration. So it's a bit of the reverse in this case, and that's not necessarily like a parent-child situation. They are quite unique configuration, and they are able to work on which scope you're applying it to in each of those instances.
Yeah, exactly.
I think most of the other questions have been addressed already that have to do with Firewall Manager. We have a lot of questions about WAF and some information requested about like roadmap items, because this is an NDA engagement. We might not be able to release some of that information, but we usually advise that you join our security community, because there we tend to do private previews, and we are always listening to your feedback. The information to join that will be provided, has been provided already in the chat session. But other than that, I think we provided some of the information that's been requested so far. Jason, is there any other question that you think had a lot of high thumbs up that you think we should address?
Yeah. Let's see, we got a couple here. First one is, I would love to understand the integration to DDoS better. Can the customer see how many pips are covered as well?
So really what you can do, so there's actually two things that we can do here. You know, and it's more of a what is it called? Here, I'll just show you guys. So it's just aka.ms/az-netsec. So we have a really cool script that we have here in our GitHub repository that our team actually manages. So if you go to aka.ms/az-netsec, you can come here and view protected public IPs tool. And this will actually just do a script that will spit this out in a CSV, and it will show you exactly what's protected, what VNet's protected, what application gateways are protected. And it's only because if you don't want to use this blade here, then you have that other option. But so when it comes to Firewall Manager, we don't get to see exactly what public IPs or specific application gateways or bastion hosts or Azure firewalls that are actually secured. You'll have to come to the DDoS protection plans, select your protection plan, and then come to protected resources. So this is the one way you can do it visually here in the portal to see exactly what your stance is. Or like I said, if you want to come to the GitHub repo that we manage, you can also use this DDoS IP tool to see exactly what's covered.
Perfect, thank you. The next one we have is, how does Azure Firewall interact with another vendor firewall in the Azure environment? Can you have both?
So when it comes to vWAN, like we said, you can have that third-party security partner. So primarily the secured hub is using Azure Firewall, right? And then for the third party, that is strictly for internet-based traffic. So anything that's going to the internet, you can force to go to that third-party provider. If you want to use just a normal virtual network that's not part of a vWAN, and this is going to be a hub virtual network, yeah, you can absolutely deploy an Azure Firewall within there, and you can deploy a third-party network virtual appliance in there as well. Just make sure that you carve out enough space in your VNet address space due to, Azure Firewall subnet does require a /26 subnet. And if you want to enable forced tunneling mode, where you just force tunnel all your traffic to on-prem or a downstream firewall, you'll need a secondary /26 subnet.
Okay, great. And the last one we had just come in. Let's say you have a vWAN with two hubs where one is secured with Azure Firewall on internet and private traffic. Can I just create a network rule to allow all traffic from the unsecured hub, or do I need to NAT it in some way?
Yeah, could you say that again, or let me just try to read that one out. Let's say you have a vWAN with two hubs. One is secured. Can I just create a network rule to allow all traffic from the unsecured hub, or do I need... I'm not sure I fully understand what the ask is here. I don't know if anyone else can help me if they get it.
Well, we can wait for someone to clarify that in our Azure NetSec forum at aka.ms/ans community. You can post that question there and we can get it taken care of. Outside of that, I think that's all the questions we had. So I'd like to thank David and Tobi for being our guests today and for an excellent presentation. And thank you to the rest of the team who helped answer questions. At the same time, I would like to remind the listeners that the best way to ensure you don't miss any future webinars or major announcements is to visit our landing page at aka.ms/securitycommunity. And while there, you'll find easy ways to navigate and find the resources and learning content relevant to our security products and their communities. A good start would be browsing our bite-sized product videos, ninja trainings, recordings of past webinars, GitHub communities, and more. We love to hear your feedback on how we can improve these webinars. Please take a minute submitting your webinar feedback at aka.ms/AzureNetSecFeedback. Thank you, and see you next time. Goodbye.